The pencil squeaked against the paper as the man at the desk carefully filled out the form in front of him. He paused suddenly, a wave of dizziness overtaking him. The letters on the page were fuzzy and he adjusted his reading glasses, his head swimming. The glasses made no difference and he took them off and rubbed his eyes. Then, just as suddenly as it had come, the sensation was gone. The room righted itself, and the words on the page were perfectly clear. He scratched his beard till disconcerted, then began to steadily write again. A ring sounded and the front door opened. Yes, sir? He barked without looking up. I want to have to look around the yard. A woman's voice echoed softly. Oh, pardon me, ma'am. The man looked up and smiled momentarily, then went back to his form, writing as he talked. Scrap is 50 cents a pound. It might be more if you find a specific part, but we can see when you come back in. Just go have a look around. You have to bring your own tools, but we can help you load it up when you're ready to leave. I'm looking for something specific. The woman peered down at him, observing his name tag. Bob, she added blatantly. Well, I don't know what to tell you. He set his pencil down, then reclined and crossed his arms behind his head. It's a dump, he laughed. We try to at least separate the junk cars from the thin cans, but what you see is what you get. Bob, you received several truckloads of scrap metal on this estate and from this location. Dillman set a piece of paper down on the top of the form Bob had been working on. Bob picked it up and adjusted his reading glasses, then looked up at her over them. Well, as I said, it's a dump, he said slowly, growing more concerned as the moments passed. I might be able to point you in the right direction. I mean, we don't catalog the stuff. The woman walked around to the side of the desk, stepping up beside Bob's chair, and he strained nervously on his seat. I hear your boys had some trouble here last night, she said casually. No trouble, Bob furrowed his brow. Some kids snuck in. It happens. That's not what I heard. The woman studied a picture in the wall. Your daughters? She asked lightly. Yes, 2 and 5. They are beautiful, she paused. Do you treat them well? Bob was taken aback. Of course I do, he said, trying to hide his indignation. There was a long pause. The woman tilted her head, still looking at the picture. I heard you called the police because you thought someone was trapped in the scrap heaps out there, she said. Bob didn't answer. I heard. The woman continued, laying closer into the picture. That you heard screaming and sounds of distress and panic. Something was trapped. A child was trapped, you thought. Maybe several. Look, we want a clean business and we have a good reputation. I'm not disputing your reputation, quite the opposite. I think what you did was honorable. Running to the rescue in the middle of the night, cutting your legs and jagged scraps of metal as you ran blindly through the yard. How do you? Bob's voice trembled and he stopped talking. He moved his legs under the desk, hoping to hide the bandages that bulged out visibly under both pant legs. What did you find? The woman asked. He didn't answer. What was there? She pressed. When you got on your hands and knees and crawled through the beams and the wire, what was there? Nothing, he whispered. Nothing was there. And the police, they found nothing? No, nothing. There wasn't anything. I went out again today just to be. He spread his hands on the desk and from him collecting his nerves. We run a good business, he said firmly. I don't feel comfortable talking about this. If I'm in some kind of trouble, then I think you're not in trouble, Bob, as long as you can do me one little favor. What's that? Simple. The woman leaned over Bob, bracing herself in the arms of his chair to so close her face almost touched his. Take me there. John pulled into the parking lot of the construction site and immediately saw Oliver standing in front of the gate of the chain link fence. His arms are crossed and he was chewing on something, his face grim. When it became clear that he wasn't going to move out of the way, John slowed to a stop and got out. What's going on? He asked. Oliver continued to chew on whatever was in his mouth. I have to let you go, he said at last. You're late again. I'm not late, John protested, then glanced at his watch. I mean, not by much, he amended. Come on, Oliver. It won't happen again. I'm sorry. Me too, Oliver said. Good luck, John. Oliver, John called. Oliver let himself in through the gate and glanced back one more time before walking away. John leaned against his car for a moment. Several co-workers were staring at him, suddenly turning away as John noticed them. John got into his car and headed back the way he came. When he returned to his apartment, John sat down on the edge of his bed and buried his face in his hands. Now what? He wondered aloud and glanced around the room. His eyes lit on his only decoration. You still look terrible, he said to Theodore's disembodied head. And you're still in worse shape than me. The notion of attending the party that night suddenly returned to him. The thought of it set off a nervous flurry in his stomach, but he wasn't sure what it was. Anxiety or excitement. I thought she was dead, too, Jessica had said the night before. I've seen her. I've talked to her. It is her. John closed his eyes. What if it is her? He saw it again. The woman he always saw. The shuddering suit. Charlie trapped inside as it crunched and jerked, and then her hand and the blood. She couldn't have survived that, but another image came to mind. Unbidden Dave, who became Springtrap. He had arrived. He had survived what happened to Charlie. He had worn the yellow rabbit suit like it was a second skin, and had paid for it twice. The scars that covered his torso like a shirt of gruesome lace told the story of one narrow escape, and the second. Charlie had killed him when she tripped the spring locks, or so they all believed. No one could have survived what they saw, and yet he had returned. For an instant, John pictured Charlie, scarred and broken, yet miraculously alive. But that doesn't sound like the person Jessica saw. John spoke clearly to Theodore. Someone broken and scarred. That's not who Jessica was describing. He shook his head. That's not the person I saw at the dinner. The next day, she looked like she just stepped out of a fairy tale. John caught himself and shook his head, trying to focus on the present. He really didn't know what had happened to Charlie. He found himself edging toward the glimmer of hope. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe she's all right. It was what he wished for. What anyone wishes for in the throes of grief. Let it not have happened. Let everything be all right. The precarious ledge became a solid ground, and John felt a weight lifted. His neck and shoulders relaxing from a cramped position he had not been aware of. The fatigue from so many months of misspent sleep caught up to him all at once. He looked at Theodore. He was clutching the rabbit's head so tightly that his knuckles had gone white. He slowly released the toy, propping it up on the pillow. I'm not going, he said. I was never really considering it. I just wanted Jessica to leave me alone. He held his breath for a moment, then let out a deep sigh. Right? He said, his tone becoming more agitated. What would I even say to these people? Theodore stared at him blankly. Damn. John sighed. The fluttering in John's stomach grew worse the closer he came to Clay's house. He checked the dashboard clock. It was only 6. Maybe no one was there yet, he thought. But as he made his way down the winding road toward their house, cars lined both sides of the street for half a block. John wedged his car between a pickup truck and a registered sedan almost as beat up as his own, then got out and headed toward the house. All the windows of the 3-story house were illuminated, standing out against the trees like a beacon. John hung back, staying out of the light. He could hear music from inside and laughter. The sound of it made him balk. He forced himself to walk the rest of the way to the door, but stopped again when he reached it. Going inside felt like an enormous decision, something that would change everything. Then again, So did walking away. He raised his hand to ring the bell, then hesitated. Before he could decide, the door swung open in front of him. John blinked at the sudden light and found himself face to face with Clay Burke, who looked as startled as he was. John! Clay reached out and grabbed John with both arms, pulled him in, and gave him a hug, then quickly pushed him back to where he had started and firmly patted his shoulders. Right, come in. Clay stepped back to clear the way, and John followed him in, looking around the room cautiously. The last time he was here, the whole house had been a wreck, strewn with signs of a man falling into pieces. Now, the piles of laundry and evidence files were gone. The couches and the floor were clean, and Clay himself was beaming with a genuine smile. He caught John's eye, and his grin faded. A lot has changed. He smiled as though reading John's mind. It's Betty. John broke off too late. He shook his head. Sorry, I didn't mean to. No, she's still gone. Clay said evidently. I wish she'd come back. Maybe she will someday, but life goes on. He added with a brief smile. John nodded, uncertain what to say. John! Marla waved from the stairs and immediately came bolting down with her usual eagerness, wrapping him in a hug before he could so much as say hello. Jessica appeared coming in from the kitchen. Hey, John! Jessica said more calmly, but with a glowing smile. I'm so glad to see you again. It's been a long time. Marla said, releasing him at once. Yeah, he said, too long. He tried to think of something else to say, and Marla and Jessica exchanged a glance. Jessica opened her mouth about to speak, but was interrupted as Carlton ran excitedly down the staircase. Carlton! John called with his first genuine smile of the evening. Carlton raised his hand in an answering wave and came to join the group. Hey, he said. Hey! John echoed as Carlton tousled John's hair. What are you, my granddad now? John made a half-hearted effort to straighten his hair while searching the crowd with his eyes. I'm surprised you came. Marla slapped him across the shoulder. I mean, of course you're going to come, Carlton corrected. I just know you've been busy. Too many girlfriends, am I right? How's New York? John asked, fishing for something to talk about as he straightened his clothes. Great. College, city, learning, friends. I was in a play about a horse. It's great. He bobbed his head in a rapid nod. Marla's in school too. In Ohio. Marla jumped in. I'm preemed. That's great. John grinned. Yeah, it's been a lot of hard work, but it's worth it, she said cheerfully, and John began to relax, falling back into the familiar pattern of their friendships. Marla was still Marla, Carlton was still inscrutable. Is Lamar around? Carlton asked, looking from face to face. Marla shook her head. I called him when a few months ago, she said. He's on track to graduate early, but he's not coming? Carlton persisted. Marla smiled slightly. He said, I'm never, ever, ever setting foot in that town again. Not ever, never as far as long as I live, and you shouldn't either, but he said we're all welcome to visit him. In New Jersey? Carlton made a skeptical face, then turned his attention to Jessica. Jessica, what's up with you these days? Anyway, I've heard you got the dorm room to yourself now. John stiffened, suddenly aware of what Carlton was really asking. The light seemed blinding, the noise louder. Jessica glanced at John, but he didn't acknowledge her. Yeah, she said, turning back to the others. I don't know what happened, but I came home one day right after, about 6 months ago, and she was packing what she could carry. She left me and John to clean up the rest. If we hadn't happened to walk in, I don't think she was even going to tell me she was leaving. Did she say where she was going? Marla asked, her brow furrowing. Jessica shook her head. She hugged me and said she missed me, but all she said was she had to leave. She didn't tell me where. Well, we can always ask her, Carlton said. John looked at him startled. You've seen her? Carlton shook his head. Not yet. My plane just gone in today, but she'll be here tonight. Jessica says she looks good. Right, John said. They all looked at him as if they could see what he was thinking. She looks good, but she doesn't look like Charlie. John, come help me in the kitchen, Clay called, and John broke away from the group relieved, but also fully aware he couldn't possibly provide any help in the kitchen. What's up? He asked. Clay leaned back against the sink and looked up at him and down. Need me to open the ketchup bottle? John asked, growing nervous. High shelf? Clay sighed. I just want to make sure you're all right out there. What do you mean? I thought you might be nervous. I know it's been a while since you and Charlie talked. It's been a while since you and I have talked too, John said, unable to keep the edge out of his voice. Well, that's different, and you know it, Clay said drearily. I thought you might need a pep talk. A pep talk? John retorted. Clay shrugged. Well, do you? Clay stared at him firmly, but with kindness in his eyes, and John's nerves calmed. Jessica told you? He asked, and Clay tilted his head to the side. Some, probably not all. Here. Clay opened the refrigerator door he had been leaning against and handed John a soda. Try to relax. You're here with friends. Those people out there love you. Clay smiled. I know, John said, setting the can on the countertop next to him. He eyed it for a second but did not pick it up, feeling like if he drank it, he would be giving in, accepting everything he was told. It could be like taking whatever pill everyone else had already swallowed. John opened the back door. Don't even think about it, Clay said abruptly. John didn't try to pretend it wasn't what he was thinking. Clay sighed. I know how hard this must be for you. Do you? John responded sharply, but Clay's expression didn't change. Stay and talk to her. I think you owe that to her and yourself. John's eyes were still fixed on the door. All this heartache that you're putting yourself through, that can't be what you want. Clay leaned to the side, interrupting John's gaze. You're right, John said. He stood up straight and met Clay's eyes. This isn't what I want. He went back to the door and pushed it open, rushing down the concrete steps as though Clay might pursue him, then walking around the side of the house toward his car, his heart pounding. He felt a little lightheaded and completely unsure he was making the right decision. John! Someone called from behind him. The familiar voice sent a jolt through him. He stopped, closing his eyes for a second. He heard her heels tapping on the stone walk, the sound vanishing as she crossed the grass to him. He opened his eyes and turned toward the voice. She was standing a few feet from him. Thanks for stopping, Charlie said. Her face was anxious. Her arms wrapped tightly across her body like she was cold, despite the mild weather. I was just going to get my jacket, John said, trying to sound casual in the midst of an obvious lie. He looked her up and down. She didn't move, like she knew what he was doing and why. It's not her. She looked like some second cousin of Charlie's, maybe, but not her. But the round faced, frizzy haired, awkward girl he had known almost all his life, she was taller, thinner, her hair longer, darker. Her face was uncannily different, though he could not have explained how. Her posture, even though she stood hugging herself in anxiety, and somehow elegant. As he looked at her, the first shock of recognition gave way to an acute revolution. He took an involuntary step back. How can anyone think that's her? He thought. How can anyone think that's my Charlie? She bit her lip. John, say something, she said, playing in her voice. He shrugged, holding both hands up in resignation. I don't know what to say, he admitted. She nodded. She uncrossed her arms as if she had just realized she was holding them that way and began to peck at her nails instead. I'm so happy to see you, she said, sounding like she was about to cry. John softened, but tamped the feeling down. Me too, he said in a monotone. I missed you, she began, searching his face for something. John had no idea what he might look like, but he felt like stone. I had to get away for a while. She went on uncertainly. That night, John, I thought I was going to die. I thought you did, he said, trying to swallow the lump rising in his throat. She hesitated. You don't think I'm me? She asked softly at last. He looked down at his feet for a moment, unable to say the words to her face. Jessica told me, it's okay, John, she said. I just want you to know that it's okay. Her eyes were bright with tears. His heart lowers in an instant. The world came into a different focus. He gazed at the woman huddled in front of him, trying to suppress her sobs. The stark differences he saw in her were suddenly things that seemed so easily explained. Her shoes had heels, so she was taller. She was wearing a form fitting dress instead of her usual jeans and t shirt, so she appeared thinner. She was wearing elegant clothing and her gestures were confident, sophisticated, but it was all no more than if Jessica had given her the makeover she was always threatening. No more than if Charlie had just grown up. We've all had to grow up. John thought of the way he drove home from work, or had until this morning, the way he avoided every driving past her house or the sight of Freddy Fazbear's. Maybe Charlie had things she wanted to avoid. Maybe she just wanted to be different. Maybe she wanted to change, like you did. When you think of that moment, what did you do? What must have done to her? What kind of nightmares do you have, Charlie? He was seized by a sudden, visceral desire to ask her, and for the first time, he allowed himself to meet her eyes. His stomach jolted as he did, his heart racing tentatively. She smiled at him, and he smiled back, unconsciously mirroring her, but something frigid twitched inside him. Those aren't her eyes.